Good afternoon, and thank you for making it this afternoon. Welcome to our CV writing work session. It's done by the Unit for Graduate and Career Services of the Center for Student Counseling and Development. I'm hoping that you're going to enjoy the session. But I would like to know, is any one of you has already drafted a CV or something so far? Sort of. So don't feel bad if some of the things that I'm going to mention here are errors that you've made. We all come from that place, and maybe I should also mention that I have made many of such errors. So don't worry and think it's personal. It's CV writing skills. I want to believe that at least we know what to expect in a CV. Anything that you would like to mention, maybe? Please use a mic when responding. Anything that you think should be in your CV? What have you added in your CV?
Educational history, and then work experience that I have.
You've actually mentioned, I'm sure you also had something like that in mind, others who haven't responded, but you've mentioned some of the things that we always expect in CVs. Your work experience, your education, your skills, and the experiences that you've gained so far. But something that is also as important to mention is that it's a summary. I know sometimes it feels a bit unfair that your life can be summarized in just a matter of 2 to 3 pages. But the thing is, we're here so we know exactly what needs to be included in your CV. That's why we're only going to mention on things that should go to your CV and things that shouldn't be included in your CV. And also, something quite important, the very first word, factual. I hope you can see it. Simply because many people have decided to add a few things here and there in their CVs to benefit them, sometimes because they have looked at the advertisement and have realized that there are certain things that they would like to include in their CVs, which is actually sometimes not a fact. I'm sure you have seen or have read about some people who claim to have some PhDs and are doctors, and unfortunately, very late in their lives, they have to be stripped of the qualifications they claim to have. And that doesn't only have an effect on you personally, especially when you are a grown up, but it also affects everybody else who loves you, including your family, your nuclear family, your kids. You can imagine how it feels like when your kids can't go to school because you added something spicy in your CV. So that's why we're here. We need to make sure that you include all the information that is necessary for your CV. The other thing that we need to also mention is that the main aim of this is to ensure that you get that job interview that you're after. You can imagine if you have spent so many years at school, attending from grade 1, if it was grade 1 for you, for us it was standard 1, till grade 12, and continuing writing assessment for all different forms of assessments and your projects, down to your thesis, only so you can get that sought after job. Then only this piece of paper stands between you and getting what you've been studying for. So I'm sure you are aware that therefore, even though it's just a piece of paper made of 2 to 3 pages, it's very important that you attend to it and give it the attention it deserves so you can qualify to be called for an interview. So obviously one would ask, what then characterizes a good CV? To start with, we need to mention that a good CV must match the skills of your prospective employer. What is it that your prospective employer is after? What do they need? And how are you going to get to know what your prospective employer wants, if I may ask?
Research.
Research, that also is important. Thank you for mentioning that.
Also look at the advertisement requirements.
The main requirements were
the advertisement.
Exactly, that's very important. The advertisement will have all the requirements of the position. which gives you an idea of which skills they are after, which give or what some people will call competences. So that means when you draft your CV, it must speak to the needs of your prospective employer. Now, if that's the case, can you use the same CV for all the positions that we are interested in?
No.
Definitely not. Thank you. In fact, although we say as your marketing tool, a CV must be updated every 6 months, personally, I feel as often as you can. When you're exposed to something new, maybe a new experience, or you have attended a new course that is also relevant, or you actually sometimes realize that this is a skill that I have, but have been oblivious to. Somebody might have mentioned that you are analytical, and you never really realize that you are until you ask more questions. And you think, okay, this is me. Those are some of the skills that you might need to add in what I call your mother CV, because it's a CV that will have no limit of pages, but will eventually give birth to many of the CVs that you're going to write in future, or you're going to design in future, and CVs that are mainly going to respond to a particular advertisement. Take note, your CV should never be longer than 3 pages, but most companies will ask for 2 pages, a 2-paged CV. So you will always go to your mother CV, look at some of the information that will be relevant for the advertisement that you want to respond to, then simply just take what is going to be relevant at a time. And also, we say, therefore, your CV must be just uniquely you, or it must be just yours. Some people will ask, what then will make my CV different from everybody's CV? If we all responding to the same advertisement, looking for the same competences, possibly having the same qualifications. Those are some of the things that we're going to discuss here. Your CV must actually focus on your achievements, of course, your skills, but not only that, also the description of your courses. Now let's look at the different formats of your CV. I won't be able to cover all the formats of a CV, but I have decided to just mention these 4. Your reversed chronological CV, your functional or skills-based CV, your academic or research-based CV, and your creative CV. These I mentioned because some students, but sometimes on very rare occasions, will ask for these different formats of CVs. But today we will only focus on the reversed chronological CV for 2 reasons, if not more. One being that it's a CV that most employers are acquainted to and say it's easy to refer to during interviews. And the second reason is that all the other CVs have got a part of them which is reversed chronological. For instance, the functional-based CV will start with the skills, but the rest will be reversed chronological. The academic research-based as well as the creative one, they will also be chronological, but the only difference is inclusion of certain sections and certain sections being taken out. So hence the reverse chronological CV for today. Something that you know of, I know you've been exposed to from grade 10 already, and some of you might be wondering why then must we be attending this, because you got a total possibly for that section in your transactional writing. But the reason now is that except for the information that you've been taught at school, the feedback that we get from companies is that the CVs that they receive from applicants are not the kinds of CVs that they're expecting. So it is therefore our responsibility as the career services to ensure that what you submit is up to the expectation of your prospective employer. So if it says reverse chronological, I think you know, but let me just confirm. I want to know that you know what you know. What is it if it's reversed chronological?
It should start with the most recent first.
Great. Reverse chronological is it is most recent first, but chronological, there's something. In fact, over the years, I've only focused on your response when I say reverse chronological until I spoke to a company that said, for us, chronology is very important. And in fact, I realized that for many companies, chronology is as important. If you say chronology, maybe I'm going to be a bit difficult now, but I do know that you know what chronology is. What do you think that includes? Time. Time, because one company that I spoke to told me that we, after having to, when we know that we're under pressure and we've got loads of CVs to look at, we fuss about everything. We will have a checklist and just, tick if there's everything in a CV that we're looking at. And amongst other things, we will be fussy about when something was done, because it gives us an indication of how well a particular skill can be done. For instance, let's say for argument's sake, you claim to have worked at a place in 2015, let's say for argument's sake. For them, 2015 is the whole year. So they will expect you to have developed a skill thoroughly for somebody who has worked for a year in a certain position. But then if you fail to indicate that it was actually not a year, but from June to July, or for 3 months, or for less than a month, then it means that you are going to give a wrong impression about your ability to do something. So they fuss that if it's something that you've done for a month or for a few months, you must mention the months. And if it's something that you've done for the whole year, then that's okay to just mention the year. So I thought I need to also make sure that I mention those things to you, like the examples that you will see that I think on page 6 of your handouts, you will notice some of the examples that we have. So the other reason for reverse chronology for companies, as I mentioned earlier on, to like it is because it's easy to refer to during interviews. Plus, it shows a solid career history and responsibilities that you have gained so far. Also, if it's education, one can quickly detect how far you have gone so far. For instance, if you have been working in a certain company or have worked in different companies, what they are going to see first is your most important position with more responsibilities, as opposed to what they are going to see last, which will be your least important, or maybe with a position with least responsibilities. So that's why they also prefer it. But like anything else, it does have its negatives. For starters, it reveals gaps in your employment and also in your education. It's going to be very clear for your prospective employer, if you use this format of a CV, to see where you've got big gaps. Big gaps sometimes because people have had, for different reasons, had to leave school or maybe take off from work, or some have been put off from work for one reason or the other. And the other reason and the other negative about it is that it doesn't highlight the skills like your skills-based one does. But the reason, that's also one of the reasons why we're here, is so that we know where exactly these skills can be highlighted, or where should we ensure that we don't undersell ourselves in our CVs for our prospective employers to see the skills that we have developed so far. Let's now look at the framework of your CV. Gone are the days where you will have your first page with that bold, written CV for so-and-so in bigger, bolder fonts that looks very nice sometimes, with your borders around. Well, of course, some companies don't fuss. But many companies, we get feedback that they see that as a page already, especially if that's going to be uploaded or you're going to send it online. So they prefer, rather, for your first page to have a personalized letterhead. Just like any other piece of formal letter or that you get from from different companies, which will have the name of the company, sometimes with the contact details of the company, or at times it could be maybe your director or your secretary of the company with the name written in bigger, bolder fonts, centered somewhere in the page, then the contact details. If you look at your page 6, and maybe also Thandokazi's example, that's a separate one that I gave. You will see different, you can always have different types of personalized letterhead, something that's going to be uniquely you. It depends but just make sure that you only have contact details there, nothing else. For instance, in Thandokazi's one, the name is bigger and it has got bigger fonts, centered somewhere in the middle of the page, but on the one side you will see the address, and on the other side you will see the other contact details. But on that note, let me just emphasize the importance of having an email address that is professional. I've seen very interesting email addresses there. Sometimes people having interesting email addresses that are normally used for Facebook and stuff. But I always advise students for their email addresses to start with their surnames, so that if, for argument's sake, you've sent the person an email and they want to respond, or they're interested in you but have forgotten your surname, by just typing your surname, your email will pop up in their addresses. That's also a professional email address. It must also have your name or your initials, and yes, the rest of the email. Some students have asked if they can also add a LinkedIn address there. I always advise that whenever you send people to your LinkedIn address or to your LinkedIn profile, make sure that it's worth sending them there. You cannot send your prospective employer to a LinkedIn that looks like your CV. There's no reason why you should. Rather, have in your LinkedIn address a very interesting summary. Make sure that your profile looks good there and professional. Have an interesting summary. Make sure that your endorsements are genuine, relevant endorsements for you. Make sure that sometimes when somebody is pleased with any of the services or maybe any engagement that they've had with you, that you always ask them to write a recommendation on your LinkedIn. It adds value when your prospective employer sees the people who have recommended you and what they've written there. And a whole lot of other things that we will discuss when we are doing our LinkedIn workshop, including how you can make sure that you are searchable through the skills that you have popularized in your LinkedIn address. And if you've done all that and you've uploaded stuff, interesting stuff, like your blog, interesting blog, or a website, or some presentations that you've had in the past, things that are going to add value and tell your prospective employer more about you and give more information about things that you cannot add in your CV, then you can send them to your LinkedIn profile. So before you add that LinkedIn profile address, please make sure that your LinkedIn is up to standard. And then your summary and your what we call your career objectives are optional. But you will see an example in Thandokazi's one, where there's a summary, or what we also call a personal profile, which does not necessarily need to be labeled, but it must be just a few sentences, not a lot of sentences, with skills that you have acquired so far and how or where those skills have been acquired. But please make sure that when you add your profile, it speaks to the needs of your prospective employer, which means you can never draft a personal profile or a summary without looking at the advertisement or responding to what your prospective employer is after. So when you choose to do that, make sure that you do just the right thing, or else you're already telling your prospective employer not to look at the rest of your CV because you are not their guy. You don't have the skills that they're after. Then the next section would be your personal information. Please take note of how we have written written those different sections. Bigger, bolder fonts, capital letters, so that if companies want to scan, we want to make your CV as scannable as possible because they don't have time to look through all your CVs. to also thoroughly look at each of the CV that they receive. So make sure that it's something that is scannable with just the necessary information like your ID number, your nationality, your languages, and your driver's license, as you have noticed. But I am aware that some of you might have added somehow. I'm not sure the person who has already drafted the CV, whether there's any of those things that you have included there, the gender, the date of birth, because your ID is already there, your marital status, your religion, and health. Those things are absolutely not necessary in your CV unless you know that they are going to benefit you. I must also mention that last year I had a workshop with geology students, and I thought in that case your gender, if you're a female, is going to benefit you if you mention it, until I was told by somebody that, by the way, some companies, especially in the geology, might actually view having a female a liability, because there are certain things that females cannot do, and there are certain things that that they need to be assisted with by a male counterpart. So maybe not all such companies will value if you are a female. So you're already opening yourself up for chances of being discriminated against. In fact, that's the reason, one of the reasons why we say that information is not necessary, because we don't want you being discriminated against unless it's been asked for in the advertisement or you absolutely know that it's going to benefit you. But I'm not saying, maybe I need to also emphasize that I'm not saying that all geology companies are going to be like that. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that sometimes you think something will benefit you, but rather find out and be certain that it is actually going to benefit you before you include it. Then your education section, take note, it's also written in capital letters and bolder font, will be your next section. This is where you will start with, again, your most recent first, starting with what you're currently doing. So if, for instance, you're doing your postgraduate degree, whether it's your honors or master's or PhD, you will include there your thesis. If you're doing your thesis, you will just include, you will write when was it started till currently, and also include what degree it is, the university, and mention your thesis. And then you continue with your next, the degree that you did previously. And don't forget to mention when it was started and when you completed it. And here now you are only going to mention your majors rather than all the modules that you've done, because you are going to submit your transcript as well. If there is, for instance, a module that you know is relevant, maybe after looking at the advertisement, and they mention that exposure to this kind of experience would be an added advantage, and you also know that it's actually one of your modules, then you can add that as your relevant module. I'm sure you will see in the examples that you have both examples, there is one of the examples of your CV have got those. Then the next section would be your leadership awards and achievement. This is another section where you showcase your skills. You don't necessarily have to mention which skills you have acquired or which competencies you have, but by just mentioning which positions you've held in the past, or which awards you've had, or which achievements you've had, it gives your prospective employer an idea of which skills you have acquired so far. For argument's sake, let us say there's a student who came to me and actually didn't include her participation in a volunteering program at Funda Fundisa, which is one of the projects, I'm not sure if you know, that is run through Mati Community Services in Kayamandi. And this student omitted that very important information, only to find, had this information been included, like she was a project manager, that already gives an idea of what the student is capable of doing if you are a project manager. But that we're going to talk about further when we talk about working experience. I just wanted to mention that just mentioning some of the achievements that you have had in the past and maybe leadership positions that you've held in the past gives an idea of what you are able to do or what you are competent in. Then the next section will be your employment history and experience. Now here, this is where some companies really fuss about time when certain things were done, because they want to, like I said earlier on, they want to have an idea of how well this competency has been achieved or has been acquired. So here you're going to add your date, the date when something was done, what was the position, the title of the company, and very importantly, which is something that I always see missing in many CVs, is the responsibilities. You can have these in bullet points, you can have them in phrases, but when you mention your responsibilities, this is also another way of highlighting the skills that you have acquired so far. Going back to the example that I mentioned earlier on of this student who was a project manager but missed or omitted that fact. After having probed her and asked questions, I got to understand that she had to first submit a proposal at Mati Community Services. Already that's a skill that is transferable, that when a prospective employer sees, it's an interesting skill that can be actually developed even further in the workplace. So having omitted that, it actually is selling oneself short. So, and amongst others, I believe that they also have to budget. They also have to submit reports at the end of the term. There's a lot. They have to have conversations with the stakeholders and a list of other things. So you mentioned all those details in bullet points. That already tells your prospective employer that these are the sets of skills or rather competencies that you have acquired. You can imagine how much you are not telling your prospective employer if you miss out on mentioning all those responsibilities that you had when you worked at a certain company in a particular position. You also include your volunteer work, and remember, reverse chronological. Keep the same format right through your CV. The look and feel of your CV must make your prospective employer want to see you. If you keep the same format right through from each and every section, it makes it easier, reader-friendly, and very easy to get the information that they're looking for, especially during interviews. A very interesting question that I would like to ask is your interest. I know that you already see that we say optional, but what would be your view? What kinds of interest would you include in your CV?
I believe interests that are in line with the job advertisement.
Great. Makes sense. Most companies, in fact, will say that, although a few of them will say it's okay if at least, because that also tells us that it's okay if it's not in line with the position in the company, because that also tells us that the student is involved in other things. But I always mention to students that don't have a long list of interests, because I mean, they might be wondering, when will you have time to work if you're going to have so many interests, even if you have. But while I'm on that, I think I need to mention that please do clean up in your Facebook. I'm mentioning this because one student asked, what do I do in cases when, because I am a wine taster and all my pictures are with me and wines on Facebook. So please do clean up on Facebook. If you know that some of your pictures are in very compromising positions and maybe are not pictures that you're very proud of, sometimes where you have been tagged in things that you don't think are appropriate, especially for your prospective employer. But squeaky clean is really very suspicious. So don't make your Facebook look too clean without you socializing and all that. So I said to the student, it's okay to socialize. here and there, maybe with a glass of wine, but not many. Clean up. And now the main question, in fact, about that with that student was, it's wine, and I'm a wine taster. And I told her, the fact is, as much as that is also your interest, but no wine taster is going to always be helped, for instance, to drink the glass of wine or beer. And I believe wine tasting is not about swallowing and consuming a lot of wine, but some wine tasters will spit the wine. So, sometimes it's things that you need to think about when you think about your interests. For instance, let me just ask you a question about being a wine taster now. If you're applying at a place like ESCOM, where they will test you before you go to their plant for security reasons, do you think that would be a good thing to mention, that you are a wine taster?
No.
Okay, I'm not saying it's a right or wrong, but all I'm saying is it's something that you need to think about.
Yeah.
But think about it now, at Distel, and you are a wine taster. Good or bad?
It is good.
It's probably going to open up an opportunity for a conversation during interviews. In fact, it could be one of the reasons why they might see the need to call you for interviews. So the point that I'm trying to make here is, think about any interest that you're going to add. Is it going to add value in my application? And if it does, what value is it going to add in my application? Then the next section will be your skills section. This is a section that enhances your marketability. It's skills that you have developed right through it could be at school, it could be at university, it could be through your work, your extramural activities, and so on. This also includes your language competencies, your computer skills, and other competencies that you have. But when you mention those, please make sure that you mention your proficiency, because, it can be a bit misleading to say, for instance, you've got Excel. Let me just make an example, only to find you can only add columns in Excel and nothing else. So do mention how proficient you are in any particular competency of the kind, whether it's advanced or it's just basic. That also includes language. Sometimes people will just throw Afrikaans or Xhosa when they can actually only read the language instead of speaking and maybe writing in it. Then your very last section will be your referees. We always advise students to have no more than 3 referees, but 2 referees are okay. It adds value if you've got an academic referee. But I always say, prospective employers do understand that not all students will have a personal relationship with their lecturers. Some lecturers, in some lectures, there are more than 80 students in a class, and it's very difficult to really have a relationship with your lecturer. But this also reminds you that especially when you are going to do your honors or your masters or your PhD, that you maintain a very healthy relationship with your supervisor, because it also helps when they are able to, talk about you and your abilities and your competencies. It makes it easier for them to give positive report about your abilities. Here, you only include, you write the name of the person, and please include more than 1 contact detail. You write the name of the person, the position, and the company where the person works. It could, if it's a university, which university, and maybe which department or which faculty. We also advise that, especially if you've got a great relationship with the person, you give them a copy of your CV or your cover letter, or maybe sometimes the advertisement that you're responding to. It helps them not waffle when they have to speak on behalf of you, or explain or tell your prospective employer about your competencies. They know exactly what to touch on. But please do not share people's contact details without their consent. And if we say consent, all that means is you must ask for permission. There are a few situations where people have been called and the lecturer, or rather the person, does not remember the applicant, simply because it's somebody that you worked with ages ago, who doesn't know which competencies you have developed lately, or maybe you have worked with just recently, but the person does not necessarily remember you, amongst others. So please do ask for permission to use them as your referees, and make sure that it's people who know you, who are also aware of your latest competencies that they can speak about. I have mentioned your inclusion of your academic transcripts, but maybe I should ask, inclusion of a photo, what do you think? Should you or should you not include a picture? No. If we say you advise not to include anything that has your race, your gender, and all that thing, because it's going to open you to chances of being discriminated, it could open you to chances of being discriminated against, it would stand to reason that an inclusion of a photo would more or less do the same. But guess what? Only one company out of the many companies that I spoke to last year only said, I would love to see a picture of the person that I'm going to interview. So I must say, most companies are saying no pictures at all, but maybe if you're not certain, you can write a list of things that you'd like to ask from the company, and that could be one of the things that you can ask, whether to include the picture or not. But then again, if your picture is not there, that wouldn't be against you, or rather, what can I say now? English. But it wouldn't make the company not call you for interviews because you didn't include your picture. So maybe, just to be safe, rather not than include that. Please send, thank you very much for the session. Should you need to maybe draft your CV now, those who haven't drafted them, you are welcome to draft them and send them to me if you would like me to look at them. If you have already drafted yours and there are a few things that you think you need to quickly go back to and change here and there, or add or take out, feel free to do that and send. That's my email address. You can send them to me on email and I will look at them. If there's no need for a one-on-one, maybe a few errors here and there that I would like to point out, or maybe a few suggestions here and there. You don't necessarily have to take my advice, but I will give you an idea of some of the things that you can change. It's going to depend on you, what you want to change or not. But if I feel that I would like to talk to you a bit and ask you more questions about it, then I will arrange a one-on-one session with you. I'll send you an email and a meeting request and arrange a one-on-one session with you so we can talk about it and maybe sort your CV out. So that's my email address, stm@san.ac.za, and you can follow us on Twitter and on Facebook for more information. Thank you very much for the session. I'm done.